In the corner of the studio, Bob Dylan set down his guitar. David Bowie repeated his words. And the 30-year respect between them cracked. It was late. Past midnight in a New York recording studio, winter 1983. The kind of hour when the city outside went quiet and the only sound was the hum of vintage equipment and the occasional rumble of heating pipes in the walls. Two men sat in that room. Both legends. Both poets. Both carrying the weight of being called voices of their generation. A title either had asked for and both had spent decades trying to escape. Bob Dylan was in the corner. His usual place. Not the center. Never the center. He sat in a wooden chair with his acoustic guitar across his lap, fingers moving absently over strings he'd touched 10,000 times before. He was 42 years old. His curly hair was graying. His face carried lines that came from more than just time. David Bowie stood near the mixing board, elegant even at this hour, wearing a simple shirt that somehow looked expensive. He was 36. Still beautiful in that alien way he'd cultivated. Still carrying himself like someone who'd reinvented himself so many times he'd forgotten which version was real. They were supposed to be working. A collaboration. Two icons in a room. The producer had left an hour ago, sensing the atmosphere had shifted into something he couldn't navigate. The engineer sat in the control room behind glass, pretending to adjust levels but mostly trying to be invisible. Dylan played a chord progression. Stopped. Played it again. His face showed nothing. It never did. Bowie watched him. Had been watching him for the past 20 minutes as Dylan worked through the same 8 bars over and over, making microscopic changes no one else would notice or care about. "That's the third time you've changed that turnaround," Bowie said finally, his voice carrying that slight English accent he never quite shed despite years of reinvention. Dylan didn't look up. You're making it more complicated." "Maybe." "Why?" Dylan's fingers stilled on the strings. He looked up slowly, those distant eyes meeting Bowie's directly for the first time in an hour. "Because it wasn't right. It was fine. Fine isn't right." Bowie smiled, but there was an edge to it. The smile of someone who'd spent too many hours in the studio watching Dylan chase some invisible standard of perfection that existed only in his head. "You know what your problem is, Bob?" Dylan didn't answer. Just waited. "You're so busy trying to make it perfect that you've forgotten how to make it good." The words hung in the air. The engineer in the control room stopped pretending to work and went very still. Dylan's face didn't change. But something in the room shifted. A temperature drop you could feel in your chest. "And you know what yours is?" Dylan said quietly, his voice carrying no anger, just a flat observation. "You're so busy performing the idea of an artist that you've forgotten what it feels like to actually be one." Bowie's smile vanished. They stared at each other across the studio. Two men who'd orbited each other for years, mutual admirers from a distance, finally in the same room and discovering that proximity revealed fractures respect had hidden. Dylan didn't explain himself. He never did. Bowie broke eye contact first. Walked to the window. Looked out at the New York night, though there was nothing to see except darkness and the vague shapes of other buildings. "I write better songs than you," Bowie said to the glass, his reflection staring back at him. Then he turned, facing Dylan directly. "I write better songs than you do. I always have." The engineer's hand slipped on the mixing board. Made an audible scrape. Both men ignored it. Dylan looked at Bowie for a long moment. Then he carefully, deliberately, lifted his guitar and set it down against his knee. Let it rest there. His hands released the instrument. Fingers still hovering near the strings but no longer touching them. The gesture said everything his face didn't. "Okay," Dylan said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "Okay?" Bowie repeated, something like confusion crossing his features. "That's all you have to say? What do you want me to say?" "I want..." Bowie stopped. Took a breath. "I want you to defend yourself. Fight back. Tell me I'm wrong. Something." Dylan shook his head slowly. Why? Because we're supposed to be working together. Because I just insulted you. Because you need me to tell you you're wrong. Dylan finished for him. You need me to tell you that your songs aren't better. That you're not better. Because if I don't, then maybe you actually believe what you just said, and that scares you more than anything. The room went cold. To understand what happened next, you need to understand what brought them to that studio in the first place. It had been Bowie's idea. The collaboration. He'd called Dylan's manager in October, pitched it as a meeting of minds, two generations of songwriters finding common ground. The manager had been skeptical. Dylan didn't do collaborations, didn't play well with others, preferred to work alone or with musicians who understood his silences. But Bowie was persistent. And there was a part of Dylan that was curious. He'd watched Bowie's career from a distance. The constant reinvention, the theatricality, the way Bowie turned himself into living art. It was the opposite of everything Dylan believed in, which made it interesting in a way he couldn't quite articulate. They'd started in November. A series of late-night sessions in the same studio. No deadlines. No expectations. Just two men and their instruments, and the space to see what might emerge. The first few sessions had been good. Tentative but promising. They'd played each other songs. Traded ideas. Found some common ground in blues progressions and the space between words. But something had been building. A tension neither acknowledged but both felt. Bowie was used to control. To being the smartest person in the room. To reinventing not just his music but reality itself, bending the world to match his vision. Dylan was used to being left alone. To working at his own pace. To changing his mind 17 times and having people accept it because he was Bob Dylan, and that's what Bob Dylan did. Two immovable objects. No unstoppable force. Just friction. Subscribe and leave a comment, because the most important part of this story is still unfolding. The fight had been brewing since the previous week, when Bowie had suggested Dylan sing one of his verses differently. Not wrong, exactly. Just a suggestion. The kind of thing producers say to artists all the time. Dylan had looked at him with those unreadable eyes and said, "No." "Why not?" Bowie had asked. "Because that's not how I sing it. But it might be better if." "It might be a lot of things," Dylan had interrupted, his voice flat. "But it's not going to be different." Bowie had let it go. But he'd filed it away. Added it to a growing list of moments where Dylan's stubbornness felt less like artistic integrity, and more like ego wrapped in denim and mystery. And tonight, that list had reached critical mass. Now they sat in the aftermath of words either could take back. Bowie by the window. Dylan in the corner with his guitar resting against his knee, silent and still. "I didn't mean it," Bowie said finally, his voice quieter now. "About the songs." "Yes, you did," Dylan said without anger. "And maybe you're right." Bowie turned sharply. "Don't do that." "Do what?" "Agree with me just to end the conversation. That's worse than fighting." Dylan almost smiled. Almost. "You want me to tell you you're wrong because that makes you the villain. But if I tell you you're right, then you have to sit with the fact that you meant what you said, and you said it because you're tired of being compared to me." Bowie's jaw tightened. "You're tired," Dylan continued, his voice gentle now, almost kind, "of people calling you the British Bob Dylan. You're tired of being anyone's anything except David Bowie. And you're tired of wondering if maybe, deep down, all your reinventions are just you running away from the one thing you can't change, that you care what people think. That you need them to think you're important." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the equipment seemed to stop humming. Bowie's face went through a series of expressions too fast to catalog. Anger. Denial. Recognition. Something close to grief. "And you know what you're tired of?" Bowie said, his voice shaking slightly. "You're tired of pretending you don't care. You're tired of playing the mysterious poet who's above it all. You're tired of being Bob Dylan, the icon, when all you want is to be Bob Zimmerman from Minnesota who just likes playing guitar. Dylan's hands finally left the vicinity of the guitar, settled in his lap. He looked at them like they belonged to someone else. "Yeah," he said quietly. "Yeah, I am." Away from the spotlight, Dylan made a choice no one expected. He stood up. Slowly. Every movement deliberate. Picked up his guitar case from where it leaned against the wall. Started carefully placing the guitar inside, securing it with the precision of someone who'd done this 10,000 times. "What are you doing?" Bowie asked. "Going home. We're supposed to work." "We just did," Dylan said, snapping the case shut. "We just did more real work than we have in 6 weeks. He picked up his jacket. That worn denim thing he'd had for years. Shrugged it on like armor. Bowie watched him, something desperate creeping into his expression. "If you leave now, we don't finish this. The album. The collaboration. All of it ends." Dylan paused at the door. Looked back at Bowie standing alone in the middle of the studio, surrounded by equipment, an empty space and the ghost of who he was trying to be. "David," Dylan said, and it was the first time all night he'd used Bowie's name. "It ended the second you needed me to tell you you were better than me. Because the truth is, we're not in competition. We never were. You write songs for people who want to become something else. I write songs for people who want to remember who they are. Neither one is better. They're just different." He opened the door. Cold air from the hallway rushed in. "But you can't see that," Dylan continued, "because you're still trying to win a game nobody else is playing. And I can't help you with that. I can barely help myself. So that's it." Bowie's voice cracked slightly. "You just walk away." Dylan shifted the guitar case to his other hand. "I'm not walking away. I'm just not staying somewhere I'm being measured against a standard that doesn't exist. You don't need me, David. You need to figure out why you thought you did." He walked out. The door closed behind him with a soft click that somehow sounded louder than it should have. Bowie stood alone in the studio. The engineer in the control room had his head down, pretending he hadn't witnessed any of it. After a long moment, Bowie walked to the corner where Dylan had been sitting. Looked at the chair. The indent in the cushion where Dylan's weight had been. The space where the guitar had rested. On the floor, partially hidden under the chair, was a folded piece of paper. Bowie picked it up. Unfolded it carefully. Lyrics. In Dylan's cramped handwriting. A verse for the song they'd been working on. The song Dylan had been trying to perfect all night. The changes he'd been making over and over. At the bottom, a note. "Try this. Might be closer to what you were hearing. B." Bowie stared at the paper for a long time. Read the lyrics. Read them again. They were perfect. Better than anything he'd written for the song. Better than anything he could have written. He sat down in Dylan's chair. Still warm. Held the paper in both hands. What followed stayed with everyone who witnessed it, long after the sound faded. The engineer came out of the control room after 20 minutes of silence. Found Bowie still sitting in Dylan's chair, the lyrics in his lap, staring at nothing. "Mr. Bowie? Should I shut down for the night?" Bowie looked up slowly. "He left me the verse." "Sir? The verse I said wasn't good enough. He rewrote it. Left it for me." "After everything I said?" The engineer said nothing. There was nothing to say. Bowie carefully folded the paper. Put it in his jacket pocket. Stood up. "We're done here." They never finished the album. Never spoke about that night. The collaboration officially ended in January with a brief press statement about scheduling conflicts. But Bowie kept the lyrics. Carried them in his jacket for months. Eventually framed them in his home studio. Above the frame, he placed a small typed note. "The difference between better and right DB, 1983. Share and subscribe. Some stories deserve to be remembered." In 1997, 14 years later, Bowie was asked in an interview about his greatest lesson in humility. He paused for a long time before answering. Someone once showed me that defending yourself is easy. Walking away with grace is hard. And leaving something beautiful behind when you go, that's the real art. He never said Dylan's name. He didn't need to.